Hello and welcome back to Chicanery. Once again, it is your host. Hi, I'm Danny, and we have JT here.
Hello, welcome to part two of the Las Vegas GP episode.
Yeah, so we had to split this one up if you've been paying attention to my ramblings on Twitter. This is a near enough 5,000 word script. Um, and having a monster 2 hour episode is, well, frankly, just not in the cards. So had to split this one up because we are getting into the proper Las Vegas race weekend. And oh boy, is it an absolute, absolute mess. I said at the end of the last episode, all gas, no brakes. I mean it because like I said, this is just where we're going. So, but first, before we get to free practice one, and which is free practice one, free practice two in the aftermath, that's going to take up a lot of our time here. But before, we're going to talk about how down to the wire preparation for the circuit got. Because local legislation, sorry, basically force that Las Vegas Boulevard, as well as all of the surrounding streets that the circuit comprised of, they do still need to function as active roadways. Um, so it means that doing things like testing the circuits and inspections and what have you, it was all down to the wire. So there was a high-speed test with the safety car at about 2 o'clock, 2 a.m. Thursday morning, and it was about I think it was it was right before the roads reopened, so I think it was like 4 or 5. Where because the FIA mandates a track inspection to make sure that everything is good. Now, as reported by Jenna Fryer, who works for Associated Press Sports's site, it passed. But as somebody else pointed out, you don't ever really know if the track is truly good, especially when you start talking about street circuits and the hasty preparations that we saw for Las Vegas. Nobody really knows until cars hit the track for practice. And we found out very quickly. 8 o'clock local time, 11 p.m. on the East Coast. Free practice one got underway. And I'm sure if you're familiar with Formula One, then you know that each practice session is an hour. Well, we only got 8 minutes before the session was red flagged. Carlos Sainz and Esteban Ocon hit a drain cover on Las Vegas Boulevard. It was just in front of the Bellagio fountain. And it was so severe that Ferrari team principal Frederick Vasseur would talk to media basically during the delay, because it's worth noting that the session was red flagged and very quickly was noted that it would not be restarted. He talked to some media talking about how the monocoque, the engine, and the battery, or energy stores, if you're a proper F1 nerd, were destroyed in the accident, and Alpine would need to use a spare chassis because that car was badly damaged. Um, Perhaps unsurprisingly, this prompted the FIA to go and have a look at all of the drain, not only the drain cover in question, but all of them. And they found that so initially it was reported that the outer ring on the drain covers is what was pulled up by the cars. That is incorrect. As per photos from photographers and journalists, and even some things published later, it was actually the center cover of the drain cover. That is what was pulled up, and that was what damaged Esteban Ocon's car and completely destroyed Carlos Sainz. And it is a shout out to Fernando Alonso, who somehow managed to see that and dodge that. We talk about how he's getting older and surely isn't going to be sticking around F1 much longer. If his vision and his reflexes are still that good, that man has another decade in this sport easy. Because even on the replays, you can barely see that. And clearly his eyes were able to track that and dodge that. So I just want to point that out. I think that's very cool. But anyhow, yes, the centerpiece was pulled up, and that was what totaled the Ferrari and Alpine ostensibly. And this is where and it ended, like I said, it ended FP1. It was announced very quickly that it was going to be ended without being the session would not be resumed. And you had basically the contractors and track workers going around. And at 10:18 local time, which is like 1:18 in the morning on the East Coast, was that a single water valve cover on the Las Vegas Grand Prix circuit failed during the first practice session. The FIA, F1, and local circuit engineering teams, and that last group is important for later. So do remember that, are actively working to review and address the issue. We will provide an update on the race schedule as soon as possible. And then there's some stuff about food and drink sales and tickets underneath that, but that's not relevant certainly to this piece. Well, not yet. And it is interesting because while the F1 Las Vegas Twitter account was very definitive about this one, some folks working with the FIA had already suggested to both on socials and from what I can tell, even to some potentially closed doors meetings with the teams, that there might have been other faulty frame covers elsewhere around the circuit. And in fact, just a short time after that statement was published at 10:31, if you pay attention to NASCAR media, you know who Jeff Gluck is. He was at the Las Vegas Grand Prix weekend, and he took photos and videos of work crews circling the same sort of drain covers with pink spray paint. And then this is also where he gets on to his thing about, blackout tarps and so on and so forth, but which that was a whole thing in and of itself. But in just not too long after that, F1 freelancer Alex Harrington, he would post a video. He tweeted a video of that showed workers filling the covers with asphalt, and what they did was they pulled that centerpiece out that became detached and literally just filled over all of it with asphalt, with a quick setting asphalt as a way to basically prevent this from happening again. And then at 11:02 local time, it was announced, 11:02 p.m. local time, it was announced that the start of Free Practice 2 would be delayed. And this is where everything goes absolutely to shit. So, of course, there were extensive remedial repairs. And the Free Practice 2 was slated to start at midnight. However, of course, that didn't happen. Initially, teams were being told 2, then 2:15, then like 2:30. You can actually see as the Ferrari Twitter account basically quote tweets itself to update the time as they get that information. But it was 2:30 was when we ended up getting going, and because there was no running basically in Free Practice 1, Free Practice 2 was extended by 30 minutes, so it was a 90-minute session. But they needed to get a move on because, as per legislation and agreement with the city of Las Vegas, F1 only had until 4 a.m. Local time to get this done. And curiously, after the conclusion of Free Practice 2, because me being over here in the Eastern time zone, I woke up and Free Practice for the morning and Free Practice 2 had just finished up. And the F1 Vegas Twitter account tweeted that there is, no higher priority at an F1 race than the safety and security of drivers, fans, and staff alike. Following last night's incident involving a water valve cover, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, F1, and the FIA decided to take extra precautions to ensure the integrity of the track prior to the resumption of racing. These additional measures required multiple hours to fully complete, which led to a significant delay in the race schedule. Given the lateness of the hour and logistical concerns regarding the safe movement of fans and employees out of the circuit, Las Vegas Grand Prix made the difficult decision to close the fan zones prior to the beginning of Free Practice 2. With a full round of practice successfully completed, Las Vegas Grand Prix looks forward to providing a safe and entertaining race weekend for all. So, fairly innocuous, right? Basically, well, we had some kind of fuck shit go down, and we had to move under sort of extraordinary circumstances. Now, general attendees, ticket holders were given $200 credit to spend at either local venues tied to the race or the various F1 merch stands. Now, certainly at this time of recording, which is November 22nd at a little after a quarter after 4 in the afternoon, there's no word on any like proper compensation packages. If something happens between now and the episode release, then editor Danny will make an appearance. But I don't suspect that will be the case because there's some pending litigation regarding this. And again, we'll get to that. But, needless to say, the Thursday free practice fiasco was, well, just that. It was a fiasco because you had folks all over media, not even just F1 media or local Las Vegas media that were checking in. You had everybody. This was quite the story. You had Dan Edmonds. He's a technical director at Car and Driver. He had a career I say career, but he used to volunteer as a track worker a lot when Las Vegas was in Phoenix and then at Long Beach. And he talked about, part of why they were the drain covers. One failed and multiple were in the process of failing were due to basically bad welds and the fact that they didn't get enough time to sit and set, and then the fact that they weren't checked thoroughly enough. It was just a mess, and it continued to get worse. But before we get to that, I do want to kind of comb through this statement from the F1 Las Vegas, and not the second one. We'll talk to the second one that made everybody mad in a second, but the first one. It seems innocuous enough, right? Like I said, some extraordinary stuff happened, and we had to kind of move accordingly. I think it's indicative of what just feels like very weird and kind of half-assedness of all of this. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, truthfully, I feel like they could have just handled the whole situation a little bit better. I mean, I could be wrong and just me not knowing enough, but personally, I feel like, I don't know, just going and saying, oh yeah, we have to close all the fan zones and stuff, and like again, that really sucks for the people that have like general admission because they probably are only there for like one day or something, or just that time, and they can't get any more access to it. I was like, honestly, they should have just been able to, I guess, essentially just like tell people this is what's going on. Free practice one is not being resumed, and then allow them to like basically just like leave and also like come back, like re-enter the like venue when free practice 2 started. That way people wouldn't like you wouldn't have that, I feel like. Even though again, maybe that's not possible, even though I feel like it kind of is. I feel like it's easy to just let people have their tickets, which I mean, and maybe that's another thing. It's like depending on what kind of ticket you have for the event and everything like that might depend on whether or not you are able to allow people to just basically like freely go in and out of the venue. They may not have that such a sort of thing because I know like when I went to like the Nashville race for IndyCar the previous year, there was like a lot of rain and like storms that had come through that kind of delayed the start of the race, and some people left the track, such as myself, left the track and just came back when um, I heard anything about the race starting soon. Um, and like nothing happened. Like it was people could just like go in and out. And I don't know, I think the ticket allowed you to go like in and out of the venue anyways, but like that might have been the thing. I'm not sure if F1, like I don't know any of the details of like their ticketing, so maybe that was the problem that their ticketing they didn't like allow for that. Um, but I don't know. And then giving people a $200 voucher to spend on merch, like everybody knows how expensive F1 merch is. You could probably only use that on like one item, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a photo that somebody tweeted at the Grand Prix. I don't remember who it is. This was the one that I didn't think to bookmark for later. But it was an Alfa Romeo shirt that was like $320. And it's like, Jesus
I
Christ.
saw like a McLaren hat that was going for like $70 and like a Red Bull shirt that might have been like 120 or something like that. It was just like the most absurd merch price. Like you were paying like an arm and a leg to buy F1 merch pretty much. And then I know apparently like they did, I think some law firm in Vegas did like sue them or say that they were bringing a lawsuit against Formula One because of how they handled it. And honestly, I feel like some of this is why you probably should read like the fine print, the terms and conditions when you buy tickets to venues. Doesn't have to be a race, it can be anything, just because like sometimes they might try to like shortchange you and like try to like not even necessarily scam, but like if they think they can get away with, pulling the rug out from underneath you, they might do it. So like I think that's why, because I know somebody said that. They're like, yeah, this is probably why you should read the terms and conditions and all that stuff for ticketing. Yeah.
Yeah, so and then yes, there was indeed a lawsuit filed. So that was filed on Friday during so well a couple of things because we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. Um, and I we'll dive this in more detail. But yes, during Friday, first of all, Renee Willem and Stefano Domenicali, they issued a joint statement at 4 p.m. local time on Friday about the events of FP1 and FP2, and it's a very very horrible statement. Like you took something that was bad and you made it worse. And then not too long after, yes, Demopoulos Law, in conjunction with JK Legal and Consulting, to Steve Demopoulos being a big personal injury attorney is his specialty. And J&K specialing in class actions. There was a class action filed. But again, we'll get to that in a second. But as per certainly Vegas, terms and conditions. So this was the other thing. I put out a call asking if anybody, went to the race, like had terms and conditions and things, because I was able to get in contact with somebody from who went to COTA. And she was nice enough. She sent me all of the ticket stubs and everything. I don't know. I might put, of course, redacting anything sensitive, and then maybe I'll put it in like a Google form and I'll link that when this goes live on a Substack. But yes, there are certainly at COTA, there were very strong terms and conditions about conditions of, what they call force majeure, and how that basically Formula One, the venue, in this case, Circuit of the Americas, will not be liable for basically anything weird that happens. If something weird happens and, a session gets canceled or whatever the case may be, then, well, tough. It sucks, but, I'm sorry, you're going to have to figure it out. And doubly so because this particular person had a weekend experience package, and they're very much like, okay, well, you're here for 3 days, so if something happens one day, then get over it. Is effectively what the terms and conditions state. Now, granted, again, given that F1 did everything in house, I don't know if terms and conditions would have been different potentially. Like I said, I put a tweet up asking about it. So if somebody gets back to me about that, again, I will cut in roughly here with basically an addendum. But given that, force majeure is a reasonable legal defense for all intents and purposes, if that is the case, then said class action should get tossed like immediately, because there in theory wouldn't really be any grounds for it, a suit of any kind. But again, we'll get to the nitty-gritty of that here in a bit. But it is worth noting that sort of, in the aftermath of FP1, it got worse. So it was 1 o'clock Friday morning, because it was Friday morning by this point. So it was 1 a.m. It was a quarter to 1. FIA published a document basically notating some dialogue between the stewards and Ferrari, which basically, because the Ferrari saying, that the damage from the drain cover had forced, replacement of, components. But particularly, it was the the replacement of restricted components, particularly the energy store, the battery, under Article 28, Section 2 of the Formula One sporting regulations. That is a restricted component. And of course, if you do that, that is, that's a grid penalty. We see that from time to time, especially at particular races where it feels like half the grid gets a penalty because of component replacement. Like we saw that at Monza for a number of years with the way that the schedule was set up. But an hour after this, so 1:43, the statement issued. Having received a report from FIA technical delegate stewards concerning car number 55, Carlos, staying at the survival cell, internal combustion engine, energy store, and control electronics were damaged beyond repair following an impact with a foreign object, and having received a request from the competitor requesting a derogation. And that is very fancy language for they just wanted an exemption. Basically, something weird happened. Can we just ignore it? However, basically, and like I said, I'll skip to get the super technical, but to kind of put the statement into plain English, and again, this will be posted in full. The FIA and the stewards recognized the extraordinary circumstances in which this took place. However, according to the stewards, at least this is beyond their remit. This is outside of their control to be able to grant an exemption for the replacement of restricted components. There has been lots of ink spilled about how stewarding and the FIA are broadly very, very inconsistent on a per race basis. So, well, if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sure quite how much I buy that was beyond their realm of authority, for want of a better phrase. But but the stewards in the various notes that they sent between Ferrari and the FIA go out of their way to stress the, what they call unusual and mitigating circumstances of the incident. And even the FIA and some of its official reports say the same thing. So I do think that that is absolutely worth noting. And it seemed like there was a bit of back and forth between stewards and the FIA about how to handle this, because it took another hour for the grid drop to be official, with, of course, citing a breach in 28.2. It was 2:45 in the morning when that happened. And now, and of course, for anybody who's potentially wondering why Ocon didn't get bopped for the infraction, it was because Alpine only had to replace the chassis, and for reasons that to be perfectly honest, I still don't completely understand. The chassis does not fall under the restricted component allotment. So, given that that was it, but power unit fine, battery fine, everything else was fine, he escaped any penalty. But like I said, I don't know about you, but I think it is wild that nobody was apparently in any position to grant Carlos and Ferrari an exception for something that they literally had zero control over. Like, imagine your car getting wiped out by a drain cover and then getting a penalty because you had to fix it.
I mean, I think the same thing. I think it's a bit stupid that they gave them a penalty. It's like there was nothing they could do. It, nobody had any control over the drain cover. I mean, nobody knew that it was going to pop up. I know usually whenever there is racing on street courses, whether it be open wheel or sports cars or whatever, usually the drain cover things are wielded shut so they don't pop up. For whatever reason, I think that one maybe wasn't able to be wielded shut. I don't know, but it wasn't anything in their control. So it's like I think they should have been a little bit more lenient. I don't know if maybe they're like, oh, we don't want to be lenient because it's setting a precedent, even though it's like there was, to me, that was like a very freak accident. Like that usually doesn't happen. I know it, I think it might have happened like one other time, like 2 years ago or something. I know like somebody like quote tweeted it. I think it was like, it might have been like Azerbaijan or something.
Mm-hmm.
And a drain cover also popped up there and damaged somebody's car during a either practice or qualifying session. I don't really know what happened there, but I think that's just FIA is kind of just being a little bit petty, to be honest. It's just Like, just let it go. This one time.
Yeah, I completely agree, and yeah, it was yeah, Azerbaijan a couple years ago, and then it happened actually at Monaco. That was like 10 years ago, where one popped up because funny enough, if I recall correctly, it was I think well, actually, it was more than 10 years ago now because Michael Schumacher was still at Ferrari, and I do believe somebody got wiped out by one. So yes, I mean this does happen occasionally, but yes, the lack of any sort of derogations granted is just incredible to me. It's honestly, it's baffling. I don't see any real reason why that couldn't have been granted given the unusual circumstances of this incident. So I don't know. Perhaps we'll learn more about it later. I know that Ferrari was pushing to have somebody pay for this. Um, again, as of the time of this recording, there's no real word on that, but there was a lot floating around, certainly over the race weekend, that Ferrari might lodge a formal complaint as a result of this, because Carlos Sainz was livid about the penalty, the grid drop. Fred Vasseur he was almost beside himself, angry about it. Um, and before we move on to the just trash fire of a statement that Rene Wilm and Stefano Domenicali would put out about FP1 and FP2 on the Friday afternoon. Um, let's talk about the pure levels of copium from Toto about all of that. Like
He was
I
throwing a tantrum. I'm like, oh my god, bro. Like, it's not that. Like, he did not like the fact that people were like, I guess, critiquing it, basically saying that, yeah, all of this happening, all of this like complete and utter tomfoolery happening leading up to the race is kind of like maybe leaving a bad taste in people's mouths or kind of making the event look bad itself. And he was so mad about that. And I'm like, I feel like that is a perfectly valid thing for people to say is that, yeah, all of this leading up to it looks it looks pretty bad. It looks pretty poor because especially considering how much this event itself was hyped up so much, it's like, yeah, this looks pretty bad. I can't lie. I mean, I don't know why that was so like triggering to him. I mean, it's like, bro, like please be for real.
Yeah, I didn't understand it at all, and basically, this is dumb and this is bullshit. And it's like except it's not though. Like you have a event. You have two competitors with ruined cars, and that could have been a real safety issue to Carlos with that drain cover popping up because of the fact that it hit the bottom of the shell. I'm like, that could have severely injured him. And then yes, the lead up to the race had already been a mess. And then, the fact that, 8 minutes into the first session, sorry, of cars on track, it was we got 8 minutes and then it turned into a mess. And this is completely ignoring the fact that the opening ceremony, Max made it kind of a point to trash the opening ceremony. And then the fact that it was raining heavily in Las Vegas and its, drainage system, which, works kind of. And the fact that there were videos of people, driving through significant amounts of standing water and so on and so forth. So you could have had another issue here. We have completely sped past that to try to find some level of brevity. But it's like even the Wednesday was kind of a disaster. It's like, yes, sometimes these things do happen, but it's about, understanding, the reception of the drivers, understanding, and the fans, the residents that have put up with, a year of F1 making a mess to put on this event, and all of the fans who have come in to try to spectate. Somebody, said, he didn't get this mad after Abu Dhabi 2021. And I feel like that's super duper telling because he absolutely didn't. You talk about, robbery, that was it. And dude was like, okay, well, shit happens. But then you get something that doesn't involve, even if it doesn't even involve one of his cars. And dude is, during the media sessions during the stoppage is just raging about it. And it's just, I understand Toto, he's a businessman first and foremost. but I would have thought that at this point he has been in Formula One long enough to be able to kind of see and understand the broader picture.
Toto Wolff is very delusional sometimes, I can't lie. I feel like sometimes he just lives in a different world than everybody else.
Yeah, I honestly, I think you're kinda onto something, watching his very vehement opposition of, the Andretti Cadillac entry has been kinda wild, as has been watching as they've whittled down the amount of excuses that he has. That's actually been very funny, but, well, that's a story for another day. Um, but yes, but let's get to the bomb that got set off and really soured opinions on this event. So, of course, free practice 3 and qualifying, again, I mean, it was late as shit, but nothing untoward went on. But it's once again, it's what was brewing in the background that was of particular interest. So, like I had alluded to before, uh, Renee Vogt and Stefano Domenicali, they issued a joint statement as F1 and the Vegas Grand Prix circuit itself. It was at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, talking about what took place in FP1 and FP2. And again, we're gonna kind of chop and change through this because this is 1,000 words that says a whole lot of nothing, if I'm being perfectly honest. So we're gonna try and cherry pick the best parts here. But they certainly open with of course our top priority in Formula One is safety and security, drivers, fans, employees. Responsibility for the oversight of a Formula One event falls with Formula One as well as the commercial rights holders for the sport, the FIA as the regulatory body, and the local promoter, in this case, the Las Vegas Grand Prix. This is important. This is important for those who are new to racing to understand, which I feel like that is hella condescending. Like, let me be honest. Not everybody may understand the absolute inner workings, particularly at motorsport, but this as a structure is not unique. If you have hosted any event at anything at any city, there is a similar chain of command. Like, what a shitty way to start the statement. But it goes on to say, last night, approximately 9 minutes in the first free practice session, a water valve cover broke. We know this on Las Vegas Boulevard. But that's a known quantity. At the time, the FIA, which is responsible for the safe running of activities on the circuit, stopped the session so we could look at the broken water valve cover and inspect the track. This has happened on occasion at other tracks at other races around the world, which we talked about. The precautionary step of removing all of the water valve covers on the entire track and filling them with sand and asphalt was undertaken. And the entire process from determination of the issue to remediation took approximately 5 hours. The decision to remediate in this way was taken out of abundance of caution because of the safety of the drivers, trackside marshals, and officials. And our fans is always our highest priority. Sure. We want to thank the contractors who worked so expeditiously to resolve the issue so quickly. So, yes. And, then of course the statement goes on to talk about, basically kind of has a bit of a timeline to kind of break all of that down, which again feels a bit redundant, but I mean, whatever. And then, it starts to talk about, and this is also very clearly was co-written by an American entity because if you read the statement, it reads like at the end of NASCAR post race where he talks about, and I had, a bad fast, McLaren grill Chevy today. That's kind of what this reads like, talking, thanking everybody first of all, which is again just very funny, purely an observation. But here's where things get interesting. It says, now let us turn to the fan experience. The delay in the start of the second free practice session from midnight to 2:30 a.m. Pacific time created risk for our employees and our fans. We made the decision to close the fan areas that are under the Las Vegas Grand Prix purview at 1:30 a.m. Pacific time and send fans home. Let us explain why. First, we were concerned about our public safety and security officials who had been in service for a long time and who were being asked to work for the next three nights. Then they go on to thank the cops and Department of Public Works. And it's like, okay, whatever. Second, we were concerned about our transportation employees who were responsible for driving our fans back to hotels. And by federal law, they were bumping up against the amount of time they can legally and safely drive buses, which I mean, fair enough. And finally, our hospitality staff needed the ability to clean and resupply our guest areas to ensure that the fan experience is optimal for everyone over the coming days. We know this is disappointing, and we hope our fans will understand that based on this explanation, we had to balance many interests, including the safety and security of all participants and the fan experience over the whole race weekend. And, you read that, you hear that, you think, you know what? Okay, fair enough, I guess. Not really that big of a deal. But here is what I thought was the real kick in the teeth. We have all been to events like concerts, games, and even other Formula One events that have been canceled because of factor due to weather or technical issues. It happens. Once again, to quote you, because I feel like that was perfect. Loud, extremely loud, incorrect buzzer noise. You do not sit and be patronizing to people who have spent significant amounts of money to come to your events and then say, well, it happens, get fucked, have a good day. You do not do that. I cannot stress enough just how bad the optics of that are.
Personally, I wouldn't have had an issue with that statement if it wasn't for the fact that they yeah, of course, everybody knows that there can be random natural events that occur that are completely out of anybody's control and nobody can really do anything about it. However, a lot of other venues, the thing is they account for that, which I'm like, I feel like again, they really didn't do that. Because that's why
No,
I'm
they
like,
didn't.
if they did, then you wouldn't have it where they had to shut everything down or prematurely shut down all the fan stuff and then basically be like, well, sorry, there really isn't much we can do about that. And, instead we're going to give you this $200 voucher for, reimbursement. When it's like, no, really? And this wasn't even a weather issue either. This was just something that had gone awry with they needed to adjust the track a little bit more to make sure that it's safe for drivers. There really wasn't any other issue but that. That I feel like they could have again, I feel like they could have easily been like, yeah, allow fans to leave the circuit if they want to and allow them to come back when stuff like on track activity resumes and then leave it at that because again usually that's what will happen for other venues again they usually don't just leave people out to dry like that. They will account for it and be like, yeah, you can leave and come back or um reimburse them somehow in a better way than what Formula One chose to do. But it's I don't know, the statement is just a slap in the face since they kind of just didn't mention anything about, you know, like, yeah, but again, natural that the drain cover popping up wasn't in anybody's control. Again, it does occasionally happen. However, they kind of just didn't mention anything about like, okay, how are we going to move forward from this? How can we make the situation a little bit better? But I don't know.
And like I said, and that's kind of my issue. Clearly, certainly if we were to take the contents of the statement at face value, then yes, they were basically a bit understaffed because and they did not staff with the anticipation of any issues. And that's very presumptuous of them to be like, oh no, it's gonna be great. And like I said, I mean, it's just one of those things, and nobody's gonna bat an eyelid if you go, oh, okay, well, something weird could happen. Let us make sure we have some extra, basically infrastructure folks, because that's really what these guys, the bus drivers, etc., any police that they had on staff for this. Those are just folks dedicated to effectively the infrastructure of the event. And like I said, that's totally fine. Um, like I said, it's nobody's gonna care if you have some extra folks, basically, for contingency. And that is what they didn't have. And then to not have that and then basically gaslight the fans through a statement It's just unacceptable,
Oh,
honestly.
that's the word. The word is contingency. They had zero contingency planning at all. Like
Hmm.
none.
No, none. It's and I'm sorry. It's like I have worked in hospitality. Occasionally you have events that either run long or are kind of one continuous rolling things. When you talk about cleaning and resupplying, you do that in waves. So that way, if it's food, drinks need to be restocked. Things like, cups and straws and napkins, all of that little stuff that nobody ever really thinks about can be restocked. Making sure that things are clean. You can, like I said, you can do that in waves, basically as folks move from kind of place to place to place. Okay, then you go back and clean that. I mean, you're always going to have stragglers, but there comes to a point, especially when you're talking about a large event where you just kind of you accept that. So there were absolutely ways around this that were simply not planned for. And like I said, and that's the issue that I have is, to sit here and actively not plan for these things and basically go, they, throw their hands up and, well, that's it, go home, and, tough shit. It's like, no, now to their credit, the statement finishes, basically, how will we address this tonight? We have worked overnight to adjust our staffing plans across security, transportation, and hospitality to ensure that we can function and serve fans with the best possible experience in the event of an extended race schedule. We're excited about the racing today and thank our entire team and fans for their support. We know this is going to be a great event, blah, blah, yada, yada. More basically Las Vegas self-filleting. Um, I just, but it's like I said, it's like you should have done that in the first place. Even if you thought that everything was going to go perfectly without a hitch, it's really not that hard to just have some extra people on staff. I like I said, the statement is, you read it, it's long and verbose and not very enjoyable, but you actually sit and dig into it, and it's like the more you read, the worse this gets. And
I mean, to be honest, they might have been better off just not even issuing any type of statement at all because some of it's just like, I don't know. I think part of the reason why they even issued it in the first place is probably like save face and damage control in a way. Um, but I'm just like, I don't know. It's very lengthy. I saw so many people quote tweeting whoever put the statement out, being like, "Too long, didn't read." I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
I think
reading
it
this
was
either.
yeah, I think it was Adam Stern who writes for Sportsbook Journal. He was breaking a lot of the stuff during the race weekend. Um, I do believe that was him. But yes, it was incredibly lengthy. And really, the first one that they issued at the end of FP2 at 4:53 that morning, honestly, was fine. Basically saying the initial one was, I think, was perfectly fine. It was short, sweet, to the point, and got it across. But to have, Renee and Stefano on the statement basically trying to, talk their way out of the issue. It's like people were already grumpy. People were gonna be grumpy. It's like you spent how much on tickets just to get, especially for general admission tickets. Remember, anybody who bought early paid $500 for general admission. Yes, that number came down as we got closer to the race, but it is safe to assume that there are a reasonable subsect of people who spent $500 and got nothing for their troubles. It's like those people are going to be upset and they have every right to be. And it's like, and you just, and then that's the other thing when you talk about putting out, occasionally, especially if something goes wrong, you kind of have to accept that. And but they put out a statement basically explaining what happened, and that was fine. And the only way that there should have been a second statement that came out was if it was basically for any general admissions, ticket holders, we are refunding your day because you did not get to really see cars. Like I said, it was a 60-minute session that went for 8 and a bit. But instead, it was a basically, this is why, basically explaining and trying to cope their way through. This is why we're giving you, a BS $200 voucher. That's really what the statement felt like it was in service to, and is just a mess. And well, clearly other people felt the same because later that evening, it was actually about an hour into FP3, I think. I seem to think it was at like 11 o'clock local time. Demopoulos Law, and yes, like I said earlier, in conjunction with JK Legal and Consulting, filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the 35,000 fans that it alleges were removed from the circuit, on that Thursday night slash Friday morning. The action states that the lawsuit breaches and alleges breach of contract, negligence, and deceptive trade practices against the defendants. And then in this case, the defendants are the Las Vegas Grand Prix and TAB Contractors Incorporated, and those are the folks involved with the construction and maintenance of the circuit. The lead attorney on this, Steve Demopoulos, and his eponymously named firm, noted that we will vindicate the rights of the fans that traveled great distances and paid small fortunes to attend, but were deprived of the experience. And then the court filing goes on to outline, sort of the timeline of events, Thursday into Friday morning. Now, the weird part is that they completely whiffed on some parts of the timeline, which were shifted forwards or backwards an hour, because racing went back. It was 2:30 local time, 2:30 a.m. local time, so 2:30 on Friday morning, and yet it's listed as 3:30, which is super weird. I mean, now granted, there was, in their defense, there was so much happening that even I had to double and triple check the times of some of this stuff. But that seems for an official court filing in a lawsuit, that feels like a really weird thing to get wrong. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I don't get that. But anyway, the court filing also goes on to talk about the condition of the plaintiffs' tickets. The plaintiffs being all of the 35,000 people involved here, suggesting that if the event were canceled versus canceled versus sort of rescheduled, and that's, I think, maybe where some of the gray area comes in here. A refund up to the initial sort of face value, would be required. Because and to be fair to this, it goes on to say, as of the time of this complaint, none of the attendees and or invitees who purchased tickets to the practice run event, were deprived of the opportunity to attend the race through fault of their own, nor have nor they haven't received or offered any refunds of their tickets. And I think that's interesting, and maybe that is why this case is being allowed to go forward, is because, again, like I said, wasn't able to get my hands on the terms and conditions for the tickets for Vegas. But, at least generally when you start talking about event and trade etiquette for stuff like this, at least, here in the United States, granted, I don't know, understand how it works in Europe. Any of you listening from the other side of the Atlantic, feel free to chime in. But here, in most instances, events that are canceled it's like automatic refund, regardless of the terms and conditions. At least that has been the precedent set legally here for most of these things. And, I know there's some contention about, well, we still got cars on track, but it was rescheduled, certainly in reference to FP2. But, FP1 was canceled outright after, 8 minutes. So maybe that's where some of the gray area that allows this claim to actually stick. But like I said, COTA, I read the terms and conditions for COTA, and that verges on being airtight. So, maybe we'll find out a little bit later if this suit continues, sort of what that is. But anyhow, the claim, asks for, monetary damages in the amount that will fairly and reasonably compensate them for the harm caused by the defendants. In addition, the plaintiffs claim damages for mental anguish in the amount to be determined by a jury that is fair and reasonable in consideration of the willful, reckless, and intentional conduct of the defendant. Now here's where we get, and I mean, this is classic legalese bullshit here, to imply that anything about what happened was reasonable or was intentional is highly disingenuous. It was a thing that happened, and the venue, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, was not prepared to accommodate that. I don't classify that as being intentional or even willful to some extent. Is it reckless? Absolutely. But to sit here and say that it's willful and intentional, I think is nonsense. I had heard some early reports that they were seeking like 30 grand damages per person, affected in this class action, which is a significant, I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, which would also ostensibly wipe out most of the revenue made by this race, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But I find this curious. This is, like I said, by no means my area of expertise. So, any, legal eagle types can, chime in on if this will stick or not. But this is wild, and I certainly can't think of a time where a class action has been filed against the circuit in Formula One. Certainly not during progress of race weekend. And like I said, it's been a long time since I can think of anything like this. Naturally, Formula One Group and F1 Las Vegas, they declined comment to any outlets that requested, citing, pending litigation. But I don't know, the over under on if these folks are going to get compensated or not.
I mean, they might. I just don't know if it'll be 30,000 necessarily, because that's just a lot of money. I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't think any of it was intentional. I think it was just one of those things where that happened, like you said, and that the Las Vegas GP, they just weren't prepared for it and kind of just threw things at the wall to see what would stick, and inevitably, unfortunately, caused more mess than what even happened initially. But intentional, I don't think so.
Yeah, again, I completely agree. Like I said, I think it's classic legal nonsense. It's just, we got to say it's intentional. It's, get find your tiniest violent. I mean, you know how that goes. But I yeah, I don't think it was intentional by any stretch. But it's funny because for all of this and all of this mess and all of this trouble, the the race itself came and went with nary a peep, respectively. I mean, of course, it was 1 a.m. start time here in Eastern time, so there was some discontent here, but the race itself was, I say, comparatively uneventful. Lap one, turn one, tires are cold, brakes are cold. There was a bit of a melee that saw Fernando Alonso spinning. I think Valtteri Bottas was also pointing backwards at the end of all of that. Um, Charles and Max got into, well, a bit of a tiff at turn one, lap one, where, Max, says he ran out of grip, but the point was that he forced Charles off, which earned him a 5-second penalty for his troubles. Then Lando had a massive accident. I think it was turn 5 on lap 4. And it was big enough that he was actually taken to a local Las Vegas hospital for just precautionary checks, although it's worth noting he is completely okay and was quickly discharged. But I think the race itself was genuinely really, really good. What do you say?
I mean, I have only really only watched like highlights of it. I didn't actually watch the whole race just because I didn't really get a chance to. But I think like it seemed to have like either positive or just like neutral reactions from seeing what people were talking about it on social media. I mean, some people even saying, "Oh, it was the best race of the year." I don't know about that, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I would go quite that far, but it was one of the best races that we've had all year. I guess I'll put it like that. Is well, the funny thing, as all of the talk about the weather, maybe what you need is just for the circuit to be a bit cold and dirty, and that's what produces good racing, apparently. Lewis made 15 passes throughout the course of the race, which is that's the highest this season, and that will probably stand as the season peak, given that Abu Dhabi is coming up here. What, as of the time of recording. That's this weekend. Um, but no, I genuinely enjoyed it. I thought the racing was, like I said, very, very good. Um, there were a couple, there was that one, in my opinion, frivolous red flag, or sorry, not red flag, safety car, which was cleaning up some of the debris because Lewis and Oscar had a little bit of a coming together in one of the chicanes, and it threw some debris. Um, no, I'm sorry, that was actually for George and Max. I'm sorry. That was when it was the same chicane that Lewis and Oscar had there coming together. That was why I was misplaced that. And so that was yeah, just like I said, I think that was kind of a frivolous safety car. I feel like it probably could have been cleaned up or maybe just like a local yellow. But other than that, I was genuinely pleased. And given, a lot of people likening, like I said, this race to kind of an American Monaco, given that this had the star power. I mean, you had like uh, I can never remember how to pronounce that. It was like McIlroy, I think. Then you had Lupita Nyong'o, you had Shaq, Rihanna, ASAP Rocky, um, Steve Aoki, Tiesto. Actually, Martin Garrix had an event at the Sphere. It's like, which is, and that's always kind of been the thing about Monaco is, kind of the, all of the, kind of who's who, well-to-do show up at this race. Given that this was meant to generate that level of sense of occasion, and this could be a hot take, but honestly, if we get this type of racing product from Las Vegas generally year over year, Monaco can go as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's a parking lot. I can't think of the last time that there was a genuinely good race at Monaco. You know, Qualifying is always a great time, but like I say, certainly like I said, sense of theater plus some racing. This is better.
That's
This
what's
clears
so
Monaco
funny
comfortably.
about Monaco to me is that literally it gets so hyped up during like the whole weekend, I guess, just because it's the like motorsports Christmas as people call it. And Monaco, it's like people like my timeline is so active when it's qualifying. Like everybody loves qualifying, everybody's talking about it. But then as soon as the race happens, you hear nothing. It's just crickets. And it's just like I mean, part of the problem with Monaco might just be because like the current F1 cars are just getting a little bit too big for the track, and it's kind of like there just really isn't much you can do there. There isn't much passing. Funny enough, Formula E puts on a good race at
Hmm.
Monaco, a lot better than Formula One. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think they would ever do it though, unfortunately, just because it's Monaco.
Yeah, which I think is such a shame because, like I said, certainly as a glitzy event where like I said, you've got, basically everybody who is anybody is at that. This clears it comfortably. And honestly, I talk about getting rid of Monaco. Honestly, I think you could do it too for get rid of Miami too. Because Miami was initially positioned as kind of an American Monaco, even down to the stupid fake marina that they put in the middle of the circuit. But yeah, that can go too. It's like get rid of that, and then you have Las Vegas that satisfies that desire for basically like I said, all of the high rollers show up. But then you have a track that genuinely races well. And I think next year, as the track rubbers in, because I mean, it's worth noting this is a public road, it'll rubber in as cars drive over it. The circuit will basically age. Honestly, I think it'll be better. There will be a little bit more grip, not so much grip that these cars are like completely locked down, because that was part of what made the racing so good is the drivers actually have to work for it a little bit. But just a little bit more grip, a little bit more stability. And like I said, but still overall good racing. This is it as far as I'm concerned. This is all we need. I could take this, and like I said, if this is the product we get for the next 10 years, I it great. Um, but yeah, it does. It frustrates me the amount of dedication and interest that Monaco gets year on year. I know it's, been around since the very start of the, Formula One World Championship. I understand that. But, like I said, I don't think Monaco has had a good race since probably the 90s. You talk about you don't really get much in the way of on track passing, certainly with these not these last couple years or last couple regulations of cars. So it's all about undercuts and overcuts. Um, and of course, when then it's pretty much imperative that you start well. I mean, there was that one year that Daniel Ricciardo, his KERS system had completely failed, but he won the race just because it's impossible to pass on. Just to give you some context for basically how worthless trying to race at Monaco is. Like, that's insane to me that you're down several hundred horsepower, but you can still win the race just because passing is a nightmare. So all you have to do is make sure you put the car in just the right spot and you're golden. Like, that's so stupid. But yeah, no, this was, like I said, I think this was a great race. I enjoyed watching it quite a bit. There was some talk about that because it is thought that a bump as well as cold tires is part of what destabilized Lando's car and what basically threw him into the barriers. So I know there was some chatter for the McLaren camp about, well, maybe ground that bump down a little bit. But also, given that he's the only driver who really had any huge issues over that bump. I mean, some other drivers had a moment. I don't know. I'm just going to chalk that up to Lando's error. But here's, I guess, kind of the big question. Formula One made a lot of hay about how this race was, good and big and successful. And, they talked about the race weekend, it was like 315,000 people. And, I think it's something like $1.2 billion of revenue, which now granted is lower than that estimate that they had at like 1.7. And granted, this is also before any potential results of the class action, because if the amount that, certainly the quick math suggests, even if it's anywhere close, it's going to wipe out a lot of that. But is it, was all of this worth it? For folks who, live in Las Vegas and have to deal with this, are they going to put up with this for 10 years? The late start times and the fact that half of the country and even a lot of Europe, because it's still pretty early in Europe, had difficulty watching. I mean, granted, the race, and we've talked about it. I'm sorry, because I know this will draw a little bit of ire, but I feel like this is probably the best way to quantify it. Certainly, ESPN, they published their TV ratings, and it was, out of all 3 Grand Prix ratings wise, this was the highest. And this was also one of the highest races held on American soil, period. It was like in the top 3. So, which suggests that it was fairly popular. Now, again, I think some of that flagging a little bit is the start time. I feel like a more reasonable, even if it's just 9 o'clock on the East Coast, I feel like is an improvement over 1 a.m. But yeah, I don't know if this was all worth it. So what do you think?
I don't know. I honestly don't. I want to say it wasn't really all that worth it, just because, like, I feel like it's probably still gonna cause issues with, like, the locals since they really don't like it that much. It's a huge, like, disruption for them. I mean, especially for as long as the contract is for this race, this venue, I don't think that this is really all that worth it, personally. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's good that it worked out fine. There wasn't, like, any major issues as far as it goes with the race itself. All that other nonsense that happened before the race aside, the race itself was fine, but I don't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. It's just this was a lot of time, a lot of effort, and now it's worth noting that what they call kind of the big 3 hotels, MGM, uh, Bellagio, um, and the Mirage hotels. And it's worth noting that while granted, publicly they were all calling the race, a successful, and were very much singing F1's praises. But part of me wonders how much of that is pure optics. Because we talked about the fact that ticket prices and event bundles were getting slashed almost continuously, practically up to race weekend. So, you talk about the MGM Grand buying $25 million worth of tickets at the time. Did they recoup on that at all? It's like I think the answer to that question is no. It's like, and then you start, like I said, you start putting that kind of stuff together, and you know, I also have a hard time seeing that the hotels, are willing to take that L. Honestly, they mean Las Vegas, the Strip, that is a well-oiled machine of profit. Like, I mean, Las Vegas, I mean, that is any capitalist's wet dream going to the Las Vegas Strip. So like I said, I have such a hard time with the concept that, they would be willing to, like I said, take those losses and hope that it turns around, in subsequent years. Because that can just then become just a vicious cycle of losses if it never does. That was what killed the original Caesar's Palace Grand Prix. Was the fact that Caesar's Palace, okay, well, we lost so much money, so no. I have a hard time with that. So, I mean, only time will tell what happens with this race. Personally, certainly I don't think this is going to see all 10 years of that contract. I can see, much like Caesar's Palace, 2, maybe 3. Again, the racing itself was very, very good, but I worry that this left such a bad taste in the residents' mouth that honestly they very well may revolt if they continue to suffer this kind of disruption for every year for the next, well, I guess now 9 years. But like I said, only time will tell. We will have to see what happens. But that was the Las Vegas Grand Prix. This was a hell of a thing to sit here and put together. A week and a half, 5,000 words. Kind of fun. Certainly I think in terms of, off-season content, for Formula One after Abu Dhabi, this could be fun. Certainly next up on the menu is going to be what? It's going to be probably Abu Dhabi and then, maybe a season review, I reckon.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, so, we'll have to see what goes on there. Of course, Asian Le Mans Series is going to be getting underway here pretty soon, and, that will certainly help carry us through the winter. So, we'll see. I'll do probably a couple of these going forward, and certainly for those of you that listen to the main Victory Lane Vibes podcast, I will probably be doing something like this. Sorry, for the Chicago weekend, because that was also a mess basically up until the 11th hour, and then turned into, the Cup race was, well, pretty fun, to be honest. So, we'll see more of that. And once again, this, if you want to read and follow along, I'm going to make some tweaks for, general readability, but this will be up on, I created a Substack for this, spectraltheorem.substack.com. And this will be there. It will be linked in the episode description. So that way, if you want to go read and, follow along with sources, it's more or less in the right order, I think. I'll try to fix that if it's not before it goes live. But yeah, something that you can follow along with as you listen. Or like I said, if you just want to follow down the rabbit holes of nonsense, because there was, for the sake of, well, mainly my sanity, there was quite a bit that I skipped over to try to not turn this into, a 4-hour recording session on the day before Thanksgiving. So, but anyway, this has been, Chicanery, and we will catch you next time.
Peace.